it is probably true that most people are not actually writing code themselves and mostly giving instructions and then reviewing code.
We don't need more molecules. You gotta do the clinical trials. That's the part that takes forever. That's the part that's expensive. That's the bottleneck.
This is like real revolution, like personalized computing. I have now like this code generation machine at my fingertips, and I can just make anything for myself.
If you sell cancer pills and I sell cancer cures, who's gonna win? This week on the Frontiers Pod, John and I dig into three things that have been on our minds. First, the coding agent revolution. What does it actually mean now that non-technical people are shipping apps? And do those economics hold up at scale? The second, longevity. From GLP-1s and personalized nutrition to David Sinclair's ER100 gene therapy, which just entered human clinical trials earlier this month. Finally, we talk about AI personal assistants. What does it look like when agents start running your life in the background? Please enjoy the episode. Welcome to episode 5 of the Frontiers Podcast, our first episode of 2026. My name is Steve. I'm based in New York City, focused on healthcare and incentives. I'm joined by my co-host, John.
Yeah, hey everyone. Hi, based in London, John, focused on AI and technology. There's something actually to kind of share with that around like how the nature of interviews are changing. This is an engineer role. Yeah, and things are very different from when I last interviewed for an engineer role, thanks to all the coding agents and the rapid development of them. It was interesting, for sure. Fascinating.
That's cool. What about it is different to you?
Well, they're really, in this particular interview, and I'm sure in other ones that I take, there's like a strong focus on actually how you use these coding agents, seeing how productive and capable you are of steering them in the right direction. Yeah, I think 6 months ago, no one was testing that. But all of a sudden, people are recognizing how strong Opus, Claude, Anthropic had their new model, and ever since Claude Code came out, it's changed the game, man. It feels like a complete paradigm shift. People are like on Twitter and other places talking about how they're no longer coding anymore. And in the beginning, I think that was quite a lot of hype. Like it felt like hype anyway, but it felt like it was only really like a small percentage of people who had maybe shifted to completely using these coding tools almost exclusively. But now it feels, yeah, there are just layers upon layers of engineers which are completely pausing writing any code, actually just utilizing these tools all day and steering them. And so I think interviews are changing quite a bit. And if you're a company that isn't changing your interviews, yeah, I think you're maybe left behind. But I find it fascinating because I don't know how the role of the software engineer will change when you're no longer writing code and you're just directing agents to run the code for you. I think there's the common or the accepted opinion is that software engineers will just become like system architects. They'll design how the software will look and then they will send instructions to these agents to execute on their behalf. Yeah, but I don't know where kind of the threshold is between like instruction giving and allowing the model to just almost come up with a design itself for a specific problem and how that changes over time. I think at this stage, yeah, the coding agents are mostly used to execute upon certain instruction, and a lot of the thinking and the cognitive work is still being done by the software engineer. But I do wonder as these models become more capable, like generally capable, how abstract will like the instructions become? Like, oh, I just want to create an app that does this. All right, go away and do it. And it will figure out what the entire system architecture might look like. Oh, you need a database here, or you need a UI here, and this is what the UI should look like and stuff like that. So that becomes really interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting. It echoes what Dario was saying, I think a few days ago at Davos. They had him up on stage with Demis Hassabis, and
All
they
right.
kind of asked him, like, oh, you had this really ambitious timeline for AGI. We're now in 2026. What's the update? And he's, oh, yeah, 6 to 12 months. We're
Yeah.
probably not. The
Absolutely.
role of SWEs are just going to be done by coding agents. And what did he say? Like essentially that there would be this flywheel impact because AI research itself, like at Anthropic,
Mm,
famously they say that almost all code is written by
mm,
the AIs. And so now the idea is that you'll get this feedback loop where the AIs are doing the work of training better AI models and it just loops onto itself. I
mm,
guess what he conveniently leaves out is the fact that every time they level up, these things are what, two, three, four times more expensive on inference costs. So,
mm.
okay, it gets 20, 30% better, sure. And so at the frontier, they can pay for that. Is it scalable? Does the unit economics make sense for most companies? For a startup business, I think that remains to be seen. I think these guys are betting that you can somehow have better hardware or like new models or like some kind of distillation or like worker models that are distilled from these frontier models that'll be almost as good but way cheaper. But all that remains to be seen. It's entirely empirical question whether or not that will be achievable. I do find it funny that like people who work at Anthropic are saying that they almost don't write their own code.
This is what I was saying before. I'm actually starting to believe that now. Before the holidays, yeah, at the end of last year, I think I saw headlines like that popping up on social media. And we talked about it actually in a previous podcast. And I think I was also skeptical, like you, about the extent in which these models were really writing code for, yeah, across the entire stack. But I'm really starting to believe that that number is really edging a lot closer to 100%. For certain types of things, maybe as well. Maybe there are some like particular domains which are not captured in like the data set that is used to train these models, and they might really yeah lack the capabilities there. Maybe something like C++ or a very specific technical domain. But I think for a lot of the code that people are writing, it is probably very close to being true that most people are not actually like writing code themselves and mostly giving instructions and then reviewing code. And I'm not even sure how long it remains that people will be reviewing code versus just accepting what the
Mm,
model writes and having some
mm.
other way to test its functionality that it's working correctly. Yeah, it's changing quite a bit, quite a bit.
But which models are you using that make you feel this
Yeah.
way?
I think the application and the model that really changed the sentiment of people was Opus 4.5, which is Anthropic's latest model, and Claude Code, which is basically a an agent or a product that wraps this model and has some other kind of features in it that maximizes its utility for coding. Things like how it handles context window and what things get loaded into the context window, how it manages its different tools that it has. For example, one interesting thing about Claude Code is that the sort of the basic tools that it ships with are very simple. The tools that it ships with are very simple, and tools are just like the same way that we have tools, like an agent's ability to like, execute some new functionality, basically maybe call an API or something along these lines, or browse a website. I think 6 to 12 months ago, people had really extensive toolkits where they would specify like very particular sets of tools to do very specific things. But what we saw with Claude Code is that the tools that it's being shipped with are very kind of general. It's like ability to read a file or write a file, ability to browse the web. And it's like just a tiny subset of stuff, like less than 10. And then people are just like trusting its capabilities to be able to write code that it needs to write code or do other things on itself beyond if it needs new tools to be able to create new tools, basically. But with just this like simple tool set, it's
Mm.
able to do so much, and a lot of autonomy is just being deferred to these models, which is crazy. I think anyway, with those two, with that model, Opus 4.5, and the product of like Claude Code, I think it's really yeah shook the landscape up. And I was just checking SweBench. SweBench is a benchmark that is used to measure model performance on software engineering tasks. And despite, I think, well, despite Opus and Claude getting most of the attention, I actually saw today that Gemini and OpenAI's model GPT 5.2 are not very far behind. Like, I think Opus 4.5 and Gemini 3 are tied at the top of the leaderboard, and then Opus is less than a percentage point different in terms of, and they measure that by the number of tasks that it's able to complete in this data set. Yeah, whatever has happened, it feels like we've crossed some kind of Rubicon. The performance has crossed some kind of yeah, a number, and it all of a sudden feels like they're really good. And I think just on your point on like the unit economics, I've never seen more people spend so much money on these tools. Like people are upgrading I even upgraded to the max plan, which is
Really? So you're paying
$100.
200 a month now?
Yeah, other people have. Like it's insane. All of a sudden there seems to be this cascade of people which are just willing to dosh out like a ton of money on these tools, and which is we'll see if it's short-lived or if there are real productivity gains like from not writing the code. Yeah.
It's crazy. It seems like everyone is getting on the vibe coding bandwagon now.
Yeah.
And it seems like almost everyone has been able to, in their spare time, cobble together an app or something
Yeah.
that's simple that they've
Yeah.
figured out how to just people with no technical background whatsoever, no technical ability. I made a really impressive app and other
Mm.
people are using it and I'm tracking what other people do with it. And
I want to talk about this a bit more as well because I think people are shitting on vibe coding and they're like, you can't build anything production grade with vibe coding. And then maybe put it into the hands of someone without some technical background and they won't be able to create a production app, even with these coding agents and how sophisticated they've come. I believe that they're probably not, it's probably going to fall apart at some point during the development process. But what I think is unlocked is like people can just create throwaway scripts, throwaway apps, just something that they need in that moment. Previously, if you wanted to automate anything, you had to learn Python, or that was a sort of the default, the programming language that it was simple enough that people could read, and without a lot of education time invested, you could get up and running and do something useful in Python. You've
Mm.
got this coding agent with these models and Claude Code, and I've seen a lot of like non-technical people on Twitter just building little applications for themselves. Think about that. This is like real revolution, like personalized computing. Is I have now like this code generation machine at my fingertips, and I can just make anything for myself. And I think that's incredible. People making games for themselves, people like writing scripts for themselves, I don't know, doing all sorts of things. I think that's underestimated, like how, yeah, how much sort of agency has been put into the hands of individuals as a result of these like newfound capabilities. So I'm pretty stoked for that. Even if they can't make production grade applications, the fact that people
Mm.
make things for themselves is pretty awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder if it changes the nature of maybe in the future, all the apps on your phone will be ones that you customized or you custom built, prompted into existence rather than something that's off the shelf.
I've been thinking about this as well. Now, if we lean into this ability of these models to generate code and to generate software, I was thinking like, how does the nature of software change in the future? Do all software programs built professionals, are they like completely extensible by the user when they come with an agent that hooks into them and say you have a Canvas style application and it's missing a particular feature in this simple scenario, think about, I don't know, Adobe Paint and didn't have the ability to like choose certain colors. You can just ask the agent, hey, can you just create me a little throwaway tool so I can just extend this piece of software with some new colors and stuff like that. I don't know if software developers will want to relinquish control or how that might change things, but this idea of like possible like extensibility of software is quite interesting to me. If you take in the limit like we have now or will have systems that are in perfect code writing machines, like what does that unlock?
Yeah, it lets us live in a world where, I mean, similar to other facets of our lives, everything is fully customized and dialed into our preferences and our unique quirks and tastes. And so it's interesting because if you look at the media diet that we consume, especially in the Anglosphere, I think our media diet has really multiplied and the idea that you could get on an elevator with somebody who is the same age of you as you and lives in the same country as you, and suddenly you like know I don't know, common IP about TV shows or movies or magazines, like that's gone now. Everyone is sorted algorithmically into their own set of TV shows and movies, and it's completely different. There's just no way of there's no one mainstream culture anymore. So what used to be like in the United States, it was like people knew who Michael Jackson was. People knew like the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Like there was just these common like cultural landmarks that people would anchor on. And if you got into a coffee shop with someone or just bumped into a stranger, you could find common ground because there were like things that you both saw and were familiar with, and there was some glue culturally. Now the algorithms have changed all of that. The TV shows that you watch are probably very different than other TV shows that even your colleagues watch. And it's very common. My colleagues will come up to me, "Oh, what's in your Spotify playlist? What do you listen to?" And they have no idea what I'm talking about. It's a totally different thing, and it's more and more common now. And I think like maybe in the future, in addition to just the media diet, it's also going to be everything else in your life, which is customizable, which can be like tailored to you, like bespoke to your interests and tastes. It will
Mm,
probably happen. And so similarly, your user experience on your phone, instead of it just being like this array of apps and maybe you can customize it a little bit, but it's just all of our phones look the same. Maybe we have different apps, but it's all pretty much the same setup. But maybe in the future it'll be totally different. I can reskin the Android user interface to just look completely minimal. There's a
yeah.
company that does that called Minimalist Phone, but if I could customize it, I would, and I would make it a little bit more, I would make it even more minimal than what they have. And I think you might see for older people, they'll have, I don't know, like bigger square buttons, and just the user interface will be totally different. And so that will no longer be a moat for you building a software because there'll be this ambient voice powered UX customization interface where you can just say, oh, make it so that on during weekdays when I'm working, make it so everything's black and white and you don't have pictures for the apps and you just have text or something like that. And you make it so on the weekends, the only apps that show up are this and it doesn't show me this app because I don't want to think about work or whatever that. And so all of our experience with computing will be like the way we interface with computers will be entirely different. It'll be remapped because it will be we don't even have to meet the computer halfway anymore. The computers meet us where we are.
Mm. Yeah, we can talk about this, like the rise of personal assistants and the malleability of kind of software. As you're speaking, my kind of mental spark shooting off in all sorts of directions, especially what happens when this idea of hyper personalization finds itself into the real world as well. And I don't see this coming anytime soon, and I'm not sure if it will ever come. But if our all of our information, our profile is captured somewhere digitally, and that is every single institution that we visit is hooked up to some central network where they have access to that information. Like, what is to say in the future if we have a completely autonomous fast food institution, fast food chain? Like, when we place an order, if we give them our identity, it may know us, but certain characteristics about us and our health. Let's say maybe I'm suffering from high blood pressure and will lower the amount of salt that it places on the burgers or something along those lines. It's crazy. I
I
think
think we're really close to getting there. I can already tell you, like on my Whoop, on my Whoop band, which I've now just upgraded to the medical device version, right? I have all my labs in here. So I've been able to, every single blood lab that I've gone for in the past 3 years, I've
that.
uploaded into this software. And so I think you and I had this conversation a year and a half ago after one of our runs around Regent's Park. And it was like, what if you could have a place, a centralized repository where
Yeah.
all your biostats were kept?
Mm.
And now they have exactly this. And so in detail, it will tell me all of my like optimal blood. So this is like all my past blood work, which has been put into like this user interface, which is easy to
Yeah.
read. And I can pull open one. The one I've been laser focused on recently has been my LDL cholesterol, right? So if I go into there and I can see a time series data. And these first two readings were done in the UK, and they even had to convert the measurement units, and it does that automatically, and it
Wow.
puts it into this longitudinal, digestible form of data that I can read, and I can download it as a CSV file. Okay, so my Whoop app has two buckets of data. It has the data that it has from my wearable. And so it has like my real time resting heart rate, my heart rate variability, my respiratory rate, that kind of thing. And then now it also has my blood work. Now, the one step further, which I don't know if they're doing this already or not, but they probably will in the near future, is having my genetic data. Because
Mm.
obviously, for me, as someone who has one ApoE4 allele, I'm like really laser focused on LDL and my lipid panel because of the way I metabolize lipids, right? So my focus is on cardio because my genes force me to focus on cardio. Now, this seems super fringe biohackery today. Probably in 5 years, this will just be normal, right? The idea that we should be eating different diets based on our genetics will just be a given. It's just, oh, okay, you can eat butter without any guilt or any issues. I just can't eat that much butter. Why? Because my genetic instructions, my software is different. That's
Yeah.
all. And it will be woven into our apps. And so then there's only one additional step that needs to happen for it to be integrated, which is what you're saying, which is that whatever app or interface that you use to buy food or to order food or whatever through DoorDash, if it was connected with your genetic data, with
Mm.
your overall health monitoring wearable, if those two things become integrated, then suddenly you have a hyper personalized food universe which is in tune with your genetics. And I think that's probably the direction that we're headed. There's obviously a lot of privacy issues with that. There's a lot of HIPAA, and that's your personal data. And do you want people to know that? But I think over the long arc of time, most people won't be
It,
bothered by it. It will just become normal.
it seems so plausible that that could be one future that we end up in. What worries me most is subtle or liminal like manipulation by industry. Like we already have that kind of today. My brother was talking to me yesterday around if he signs up with Vitality, he can get like a free Apple Watch, and as long as they can track his data and stuff like that. And I mean, that's been written about in 2041, which has offered some like hypothetical scenarios about how the world might look like with AI. And you can just see that happening as a layer that's built on top of everything that you just described, where you have all your data being shared by all of the with all of these companies, and there are benefits that accrue to you, but as a cost of sharing that, and in the end, maybe nefariously being used and manipulated, and you being steered in a way that are just sub unconsciously are unconscious to. That is scary. That is scary.
Yeah, the future scenarios you could paint, right? If companies have access to your genetic data, they know what's bad for you, they know what's good for you, and they market accordingly. Okay, sure, it could be really dystopian, but I think I look out at the United States today and the state of public health. I'm like, how much worse could it be?
Mm,
It's already horrible. It's
mm,
already as bad as I could possibly imagine it, right? You have companies that are literally pumping us full of seed oils and just emulsifiers and all of these ultra processed foods that we consume, a majority of the calories that we consume. And
yeah.
it's like, I just think any revision to what we currently have would probably be welcomed because the current system is already horrible.
It
No.
feels like no, what your point there has me thinking about is like perhaps there is always some threshold up to which like the benefits of technology are so obvious and much needed, but then beyond that we really take it too far. And I don't know if that actually exists or not, and just a figment of everyone's imagination and a preference. But I'm thinking in terms of take for example Neuralink. Yeah, up until now, up until today, like the stuff that Neuralink is working on is, I think, incredibly motivating and much needed. The idea is they're building this brain-computer interface in order to restore people's capabilities that they once lost, whether it's like the ability to hear properly, see properly, speak properly, etc. But then beyond restoration, there's also transformation, augmentation. I don't know, now giving people superpowers, the ability to see in new spectrums of the new parts of the electromagnetic spectrum, or superpowered hearing, or it's
Does it? I didn't realize that. That's pretty cool.
maybe, who knows? Why not, right? Once you begin merging with machine and metal, like you could take it, I don't know, really far, right?
Yeah, why not?
I picked up a Wired magazine when I was in Dubai, and they had a few examples of people that are already experimenting on themselves and undergoing even surgery to embed certain sensors into their body to be able to detect things, which is I also think that's inevitable. Like it feels to me that many humans want to live a hyper-personalized existence and be differentiated from others. And part of the reason probably they get tattoos is to distinguish themselves and to mark certain memories. And I don't know. And it feels like body modification, like beyond tattoos, is certainly within the realm of possibility. Like I can totally see people saying, forget this eye, just give me one that can shoot lasers out of. I could shoot laser or something. It's like, I don't know.
I think what you're describing though is
How have we got
it's
into this topic? I have no idea.
look, I think look, okay, people we first have to get people back to baseline, right? We are so far below, like modern life has brought the state of our health. There's what our body is capable of, and there's what our body currently is at in terms of health and just the realization of our full physiological potential. We're far below that for most of us, right? Unless you're like an Olympic athlete, you are far below your physiological potential. And I know you and I have gone on runs before, like we're both reasonably active people. If you look at most of the population, especially in the Anglosphere, United States, UK, it's so far below. Like my goal would just be to get people back to baseline or get people closer to baseline. We're dying of diseases we never even died of 100,000 years ago. It was just like if you look at anatomically modern humans in the prehistoric times, in many ways, they are much fitter and much more active, and from a cardiovascular standpoint, much healthier than we are today because this bundle of modernity has given us this very sedentary lifestyle and this diet of ultra processed foods. Now, if you look at somewhere like the Mediterranean, the blue zones, Italy, Sardinia, Cyprus, whatever, it's okay. Actually, people do live significantly longer and they don't have as much spend on healthcare, but for some reason they live way longer, and it's why because they eat a diet which is lower in ultra processed foods. They move a little bit every day. They are connected with family. All these things that we now know that we're supposed to do, but we don't do. But in the US or in the Anglosphere, it's like this like really hyper capitalized economy where we're eating fast food and we're constantly running and your nervous system is constantly being overloaded and what have you. And so now if the overcorrection to that is that we now have hyper personalized wearables and we have
Mm,
hyper personalized diets. And I don't know, whatever Travis Kalanick is working on with hyper personalized food delivery, which is ultra healthy and maybe in the
mm,
future has some partnership with Brian Johnson and you have these don't die meals that you could order and it's like personalized, tailored to your genetics and whatever. If that's the leapfrog that we need to bring people in the Anglosphere back to baseline, and by baseline, people in like Japan or Italy, I mean,
mm.
have at it, right? Like that. If we can get a person in the United States to live as long as a person in Japan or Italy, I'm all for it. And that's not to say we're going to become superhuman. It's just going
Yeah.
to bring us in line with what I think a normal lifespan would be, which would be like 80, 90 years, healthy. The reality is we are so far away from that, right? Just to get there.
Mm.
And GLP-1s will help us probably go a little bit back to baseline and will help correct, I think, a lot of these problems because it seems to be these magic molecules. But yeah, diet will be part of that. And so rewiring our diet using the tools that modernity has given us will be part of that.
Tell me more about these GLP-1s. I don't know much about what they are, what are they being developed for, but I have seen a lot of people talk about them. So say more. I'm curious.
Yeah, the GLP-1s are like, I think we don't really fully understand why these drugs work. I think the knee-jerk reaction for a lot of folks who are unfamiliar is just to say that, oh, they cause you to feel satiated earlier, so you eat less. And because you eat less, you lose weight. And because you lose weight downstream from that, all of these other comorbidities are aided by that. It's changing the brain's reward circuitry. People notice higher executive function when they're on the GLP-1s. And even when you control for weight loss, it seems to have other additional effects. So it seems to be this ultimately moderating molecule, and it moderates brain activity, it moderates impulse control, it moderates your gut brain axis and, your desire to eat and you feel hungry. But it also seems to moderate a lot of other systems in the body that we don't fully understand why. And so it's this really fascinating rabbit hole to go down.
Oh, okay, fascinating. It seems like though that they again in this area, in this domain, they've also crossed some kind of potency threshold that because like I said, I'm just seeing GLP-1s being talked about all over the place. So I don't know if there's been some innovation recently that has taken them to a level where the impact and the effects of them are incredibly positive.
Yeah, we're in the early innings of this. But yeah, it does seem really encouraging that people seem to think they could be used to prevent neurodegenerative disorders,
Oh,
that there could be impact on GLP-1s preventing Alzheimer's and certain types of cancers and all of these other things, right? And it's more than just, oh, when you're old and fat, you tend to get cancer more. And so if you don't become old and fat, then you don't get cancer. It's more than just that. There seems to be other pathways that are associated with that, like preventative protection. And I think we don't fully understand why. And so there's a lot of research still to be done there. We're really in early days of this.
and thank goodness for like Western medicine. But I also do have a bit of a gripe against it in the sense that it feels to me like it's an obstacle for lifestyle correction, that most people will just rely on medicine to, yeah, move their biomarkers back to some median level, some normal level, as opposed to changing something about their diet or the way that they exercise or anything along those lines that could really have the same effect and without the need to be spending, buying medicine, taking medicine consistently. I see that in my parents and the fact that they've been given medicine to control their blood pressure and but unwilling to change their diet, continue to load up with salt and eat high calorie food, high processed food, all this kind of stuff. So it's a bit of a shame to us. And I guess that this sort of the medical system probably pushes that as well. Don't know what, of course, like they're incentivized to sell medicine.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So there's a reason why the medical establishment is laser focused on pharmaceutical based interventions, that
Mm.
being drugs and pills over everything else. There's a reason why. There is a famous letter in, I want to say, the 1920s, forget the name of it, but basically the idea is that the focus of modern medicine should be on finding and proliferating and promoting pharmaceutical based treatments. Because before that, you had a lot of quackery. You had a lot of these magnetic healers. And
Yeah.
yeah, there's all these weird snake oil salesmen selling. They were just like these spiritual healers. People didn't know, right? It was a weird time. They thought that leeches would suck out the evil spirits from you. And that's why when William Henry Harrison died from the flu, they put leeches on him because let the leeches bite you and they're going to suck out the bad things and you'll feel better. Now, fast forward 100 years, it's okay, we focused really hard on drugs for everything. You want this, you have a drug. You want this, you have a drug. You have this disorder, you take 2 pills in the mouth, and it's this repeatable revenue source for pharmaceutical companies. I think what people miss is that now we're moving back towards some of these non-pharmaceutical based interventions, such as electromagnetism, which, as it turns out, the pathway was wrong. Some of the science is actually there. And so we're now at the nexus of physics and
Mhm.
medicine. And if you look at companies using tumor treating fields, there's a company which make a helmet for glioblastoma, it's a very aggressive form of brain cancer, and they use this really weird novel technology which uses electromagnetic waves to somehow slow the growth of the cancer tumor. This is a very aggressive cancer. It has an extremely high mortality rate, and they've been able to bring that down over time. And you keep seeing more and more headlines in the cutting edge research in medicine of using magnet based therapies, not just for cancers, but for other things. The natural sciences have served to explain why some of these magnets and electromagnetic based therapies actually might work. And one of the most cutting edge treatments now for depression is an electromagnetic based therapy. And so it's just really interesting. So that's one like non-pharmaceutical based intervention, but there are of course others. And I think your point on behavioral versus pharmaceutical based interventions is interesting because you say, oh, if you just changed your behavior, then you wouldn't need the drug. But
In
then
some cases, not in all cases. I'm sure there are some diseases which are you might be doing all the right things, but are a consequence of genes, as you said previously, or it's some other unknown combination of factors. But I do think in many cases, like medicine seems to be treating symptoms rather than the underlying causes. And
that's how it starts. That's how
yeah,
it starts, right? So the first wave of medicines will always treat the symptoms of something.
yeah.
And then the next wave of medicines, which we're seeing now, will target the core underlying cause of
Mhm,
something. And then the
mhm.
next wave of medicines will target it even higher, will target it at the genetic level. And that's when you talk about cell and gene based therapies and base pair swapping and CRISPR based therapies. And then you're really getting into cutting edge therapy. So you take cystic fibrosis as an example. The old drugs for cystic fibrosis. Cystic fibrosis is a horrible disease. From a young age, from childhood, people are overproducing this mucus, and it's this multidisciplinary based treatment regime. You have to have a pulmonologist and a gastroenterologist, and all these different specialists have to come together to come up with a treatment plan for someone with cystic fibrosis. And you used to just manage the symptoms, and it was a horrible disease, and the outlook was not good. Fast forward to today, we have CFTR modulators, and these are designed to correct the malfunctioning protein made by the CFTR gene because it turns out cystic fibrosis is a genetic disorder. You're going to know immediately upon when the baby is born. They do a sweat test and they can tell if the baby's going to have CF or not. And because these therapies target the core underlying cause of the disease, and so now it used to be a death sentence, and now people with CF can live a relatively normal life because they have these modulators. And then the next wave of therapies will come from companies like Mammoth Therapeutics and CRISPR Therapeutics, which will be like base pair swapping, and it will just literally fix instead of just substituting the protein that you don't make, it will literally just fix your genes, and it will be a one and done treatment. And your number of interactions with the medical system will be reduced to one. And so this is the future, I think, is that, okay, yes, before you constantly had to be seeing a doctor and a lot of interfacing with the medical system, which is good for pharmaceutical companies. It's good for the medical establishment because they can keep making money off of you. But then if you have someone else who targets the core underlying cause of the disease, it reduces that friction and it reduces the number of times you have to see a doctor. And then finally, when you get to the third wave of targeting the core underlying genetic reason for that, you effectively reduce the number of times you have to interact with the medical system to one. And it's like always this progression of reducing the number of touch points you have to have. We're always moving towards a low touch model. And so people say, is this profitable? And the question is always, for who? If you sell cancer pills and I sell cancer cures, who's going to win? I could price it at a million times yours, but then someone's going to come steal my technology and undercut my price. And so if we draw out the game theory over multiple iterations over multiple years, what you end up trending towards is cheaper and more successful and less invasive therapies. And so that's why there's this oft repeated conspiracy theory, or there's always some version of this, which is that, oh, the modern medical system is just made to, it's sick care. It's not health care. It's just trying to keep me sick because that's how they make money. And that's not untrue. But the person who does come along and finally give you a much better cure or treatment is going to mop the floor of those who made money from you being sick. It always trends in that direction. And so I do think like the ultimate system that we have of this creative destruction of capitalism eventually does lead to us living longer and healthier lives, although in a very squiggly and zigzaggy type of path, but we do get there.
It's mind-blowing, right? The ability to have complete control over this biological computer and its instruction set, and to manipulate that and adjust it for good. Although, as I'm sure, with that capability will also be a lot of the science fiction, the type of dystopian stories may also play out or be possible to, like, yeah, designer babies and whatever else people have imagined, maybe as a sort of a consequence of having this power. But from a therapeutic point of view, absolutely mind blowing, right? To go in and precisely fix or precisely identify, first of all, that it's a particular gene or set of genes that is causing certain behavior, and then to be able to, or pathology, and to be able to fix that. Oh, that's nuts.
Yeah.
Absolutely nuts. I feel that there'll probably be a set of, yeah, there'll be a set of diseases and stuff which, we are not genetically related, and we'll still need other medicine to be able to address those. But yeah, for some of the major things that we're seeing with, like you said, cystic fibrosis and other things, cancers, etc. Oh man, like
Yeah.
what a future.
Yeah. So I guess going back to the example of your parents, right? Like it does indeed seem wasteful. It's okay. So the modern system has created a situation where we are time impoverished. We have no free time, right? We're constantly rushing, we're constantly stressed. Deadlines, forms, taxes, parenting, all of these obligations pile up. We're full of decision fatigue. We are nervous system is just being overclocked constantly with all of these little decisions. I need to change the oil on my car. I need to do this. I need to change my tires. I need to go here. I need to drop off this. I need to run these errands. And like all of the modern world has created this cascading effect where we're overwhelmed with choice, with
Mhm.
decisions, and we're fatigued. And so then what happens is these stressor responses spike up. They're evolutionary responses were not made for this environment. So suddenly, what do we crave? We crave fat, sugar, salt. And where do
Mm.
we go? We go to the fast food restaurants and we get comfort foods and we get fat, sugar, salt, right? And we
Yeah.
get it in massive quantities, massive amounts of calories. It's extremely calorie rich. It's hyper palatable. The food is designed in a laboratory to be hyper palatable, not as satiating, so we consume more of it, and it doesn't keep us as full as long. And so then it creates this other problem where we have constant chronic low grade inflammation. Always happening.
Yeah.
We have all this inflammation from eating fried foods and eating all these trans fats and things that we shouldn't eat. And now we have to overcorrect. Now we have to have another technologically based solution to undo the damage that was entirely unnecessary in the first place. And so it does seem if you just didn't have this incredibly busy life and all of these acute stressors that led you to reach out to fast food for convenience sake and for other reasons, then you wouldn't have these problems and then there would be no need for any of this, right? If we all just lived like grandpas in the Italian countryside, then there'd be no need for any of this. And whilst that is true, I do think that, okay, now with the GLP-1s, we're finally starting to see this overcorrection work, which is that,
Mm.
and this is, we've talked about this on past episodes, right? It's like modernity creates problems, but then it creates new solutions to those new problems and on and on, right? And so you get to a point where if we can get people in suburban Wisconsin to now live longer than people in Italy and feel better and have healthier bodies, then suddenly we've done a full leapfrog in terms of our development, not just technologically, but also societally. We can get more
Mm.
done, we can be more productive, we can feel more involved, we can feel alive, alert, happier, healthier, longer lives without regressing back to this romantic agrarian style life of the Mediterranean. I'm not to say that's a wrong way of living, but it means that if you want to live in this fast-paced Anglo-Saxon liberal free market capitalist economy that you don't have to sacrifice your lifespan or your quality of life to do that. And right now there is a trade-off.
As you're speaking, I was thinking about I experienced the same kind of reactions when Leo was born. I was undergoing quite a lot of stress, he was being up all night, and the only thing at that point in time that I wanted was to binge on fast food and stuff. It took a lot of willpower to say no, let's leave that to one side. And it's not nutritious. It's not sustaining me in a positive way. But yeah, a very promising future. Who knows how we get there or how long it takes to get there. But I am hopeful for some of the things that you described. Where do we go from here, though? Now that we've
All right,
somehow
so we've
have connected coding agents to wellness and health and nutrition and longevity. And this is supposed to be an episode where we talk about things that have most caught our attention recently. So I've got a few other things on my list, mostly though around computing and AI, seeing as that's the area in which I pay most attention to these days. But what about you? What are the things recently?
I have one other topic, and this is related to the longevity topic that came up in the past 4 or 5 days.
Mm.
So maybe we'll go there first, just since we're in
Yeah.
this neck of the woods, and then I'll hand it over to you. So David Sinclair is a very
Mm.
famous researcher in the world of longevity. He's a Harvard researcher
Yeah.
who has a book called Lifespan: Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to, and he's famous for his information theory of aging. He's spent more than 2 decades arguing something that used to sound borderline unscientific, that aging is not primarily the accumulation of damage, but the loss of biological information. So it's not like you lose DNA, you lose the instructions. And so for a long time, that idea sat in an uncomfortable space. It wasn't like a crackpot scientific idea, but it wasn't mainstream either. Biology traditionally treated aging as entropy. So things break, the cells accumulate damage, and eventually systems fail fast. At
Mm.
best, you slow it down. And so Sinclair's claim was more provocative. He's saying cells still retain their original genetic blueprint, but over time they just forget how to read it correctly. So it's like a CD that gets scratched. So the way he frames it is simple. Like every cell in your body has the same DNA. So what makes a neuron, like a brain cell, different from a muscle cell isn't the code, it's which genes are switched on and off. And so that control layer is called epigenetics. And so his core thing is that aging happens when this epigenetic control layer starts to drift. Cells lose their identity. So a liver cell forgets it's a liver cell, hair cells forget it's a hair cell. And that manifests itself in all sorts of ways, right? You can see an old person in their skin, they'll start to get spots, start to get gray hair, start to lose hair, right? So it's not just aging is wear and tear, it's like this software problem, right? But as with all software problems, in principle, you could reset them. And that idea is not new anymore, but it was radical when Sinclair started pushing it. What changed everything was a set of experiments based on what are called Yamanaka factors. And the Yamanaka factors are these transcription factors that can reprogram adult cells into a pluripotent stem-like state. And so those experiments prove something astonishing. You can take an old cell and make it biologically young again. But then they revealed this danger. The full reprogramming wipes the identity. So the cells forget what they are. And then
Mm.
that's cancer territory. You get teratomas, uncontrolled growths. So the problem became, can you rewind the epigenetic clock without erasing the cell? And so that question, more than longevity, more than lifespan, is what Sinclair has been circling on for years. And now, in the past week, we have his company, BioLife Sciences, with their lead candidate, which is called ER100. It's the first serious attempt to encode that theory into a controlled clinical grade therapy. So this
Mm.
isn't like a supplement, this is a gene therapy. And that's why this moment matters, because ER100 is now approaching first in human trials. So for the very
Mm.
first time in human history, we are not using mice or worms or cultured cells. We're doing human studies where this either starts becoming real medicine or it dies. You have this AAV-based gene therapy, so it's an adeno-associated virus-based therapy that delivers a partial epigenetic reprogramming payload into target cells. So specifically, it's delivering 3 of these Yamanaka factors, referred to as OSK, and they start with the eye. And the obvious question is why this is an ophthalmic based therapy to reduce the aging in someone's eye. The question is, why start with the eye? Why not do muscle? Why not liver? Why not a systemic delivery? And the answer is actually very rational. It's because the optic nerve is a central nervous system tissue. So it's not peripheral, it's part of the brain. And so if the epigenetic reprogramming can restore function here, this isn't just cosmetic biology, it's neurologic biology. The eye also allows local delivery, so you can inject into a confined space. You're not exposing the entire body to a first in class gene therapy, and the outcomes are clean. Vision is a soft endpoint, and either the function of your vision improves, stabilizes, or it doesn't, right? You're not relying on these weird biomarkers or patient reported feelings. And then you also have safety containment. If something goes wrong, you're not dealing with someone's like liver or their bone marrow, or their germline tissue. And then also you just have massive unmet need. Conditions like glaucoma are widespread among older adults, and there's no regenerative standard of care, right? So if we're designing the most conservative possible first test of
Yeah.
partial epigenetic reprogramming in humans, the eye is arguably the least reckless place to begin. So it's not about people confuse this therapy. They think, oh, this is about eyesight and ophthalmic step change. It's not. It's a much deeper claim that the adult human neurons can regain function by restoring epigenetic information without de-differentiation and without cancer. And if that claim fails here, it probably fails everywhere. And so Elon Musk recently engaged with David Sinclair on Twitter and basically said, "Oh, are you referring to ER 100?" And David Sinclair's yes. And then Elon Musk had previously spoke about aging as this solvable problem, and you could speed up a body's clock and you could actually rewind it. And ER 100 might be the first one to actually demonstrate that in humans.
Wow. Okay, there is so much to unpack there, especially with someone who's new to this whole world of longevity. But let me try and play back at least maybe how the thinking has changed over time, or the root hypothesis that this kind of ER 100 is based upon. So you said, and I'm probably going to get this wrong, but you said that in the past we thought that aging was predominantly caused by a errors accumulating in like the instruction set or a degradation of like DNA. But I think what I
No,
heard,
that's the new theory. This is
oh, that's
so the idea that there is errors in the instruction set for cells. This is Sinclair's idea, and this is his information theory of aging, which
okay.
was once a fringe idea, is now become mainstream.
All right. I was going to say what I thought you said then was that the issue is not necessarily that there was like this degradation, but an issues in reading the information properly, and it was more the readers which were like suffering or degrading over time, and that was yeah mostly causing aging.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. So the older model of aging was basically what we would call the wear and tear theory, right?
Mhm.
It's the idea that your cells are machines and
Yeah.
machines degrade over time and damage accumulates faster than repair and eventually the system fails, right? Like that
Mhm.
this is very intuitive. Like most of us, we think, okay, my body's a machine. Over time, the machine just gets worse. It makes total sense, right? When you buy a new washing machine, it works really well. And then after
Yeah.
4 or 5 years, it starts to have problem. It makes some sound. It's leaky. And with our bodies, it's a very similar thing, right? And then there's some other theories like this oxidative damage theory, like there's this oxidative stress, and that was also connected to all this research on antioxidants and oh, drinking your cranberry juice, and oh, in the blue zones they drink this type of wine and blah blah blah. But yeah, but the information theory of aging is different because it's basically rebutting the idea that aging is equal to this irreversible accumulation, that
Mhm.
it's basically these theories before all assumed that damage would come first and that loss of function follows. But what Sinclair's core claim is that cells just stop reading the DNA correctly. The repair programs have shut down and the damage accumulates because the information is lost. But the
Mhm.
DNA itself is mostly intact. If I go to 101-year-old human being and get DNA from them, it's still intact. It's just the instructions are still there. They're just misregulated.
I see. I see. Okay. Okay. In the past, I'd heard about this whole theory of telomeres, which was I don't know how it's related to this, and maybe you can shed some light if you're knowledgeable about that space. But yeah, I think what I understood about that was the telomeres were damage accumulating at the ends of the DNA strand, and it was work its way in towards this or whatever, something along those lines. But it seems to be connected to this past line of thinking rather than this kind of new information theory, as you put it, sort of universe.
Yeah, the telomere shortening is real research, and we researched that for 20 years, but it does so the telomere like telomeres do shorten over time, right? Eventually cells senesce or they die. And this is real biology, but the telomere length doesn't explain all aging. Many aged tissues are highly proliferative. Telomerase activation alone doesn't reverse the aging in a safe way. So telomeres are a clock, but they're not the only clock in the body.
Okay. And so with this new type of treatment, this genetic treatment, this ER100, the whole idea is to inject or deliver like some of these, you call them what? Yamanaka, what are they? Not
The
cells,
young Yamanaka factors, that's right.
which are almost like new modern supercharged readers, able to actually highly functioning read the DNA, which is still intact, and be able to reproduce new cells. You said in the past there were consequences that these cells that were being recreated would lose their identity, but with this new development, that's been overcome. Is that
Yeah,
what
that's exactly right. You want the cells to preserve their cell identity. So if it is an eye cell, or in this case, like endothelial cell, you want it, you don't want the cell to forget that is an endothelial cell, but you
yeah.
do want to reset the epigenetic marks and restore youthful gene expression. So you're
Mm.
recalibrating the control panel. We're not wiping the hard drive. And so the idea is that it's supposed to allow these cells to reset, right? There's this transcriptional switch. The expression will turn on, and it has a way of resetting the cell such that the visual function is restored because the cells basically become young again. And we reverse the aging which happens in the eye.
Wow. Okay. Anyway, super fascinating. Really deep tech stuff here. And yeah, incredibly technical domain. So now that they're starting these trials, like when can we expect to, yeah, learn about how successful they are?
Clinicaltrials.gov puts the primary completion date at May of 2027, but
Or
the full study will not complete until March of 2032. You
oh wow.
have, I think, only 18 people are enrolled in this trial. So there's a lot of things riding on this research. And once we start to get some preliminary readouts of data and see how things are going, I think it will be really powerful and you'll see a lot of articles about that. But we're still in the very early innings of this. And I think for us, you and I are still very young. So hopefully we'll be able to still benefit from this research, but it takes many years. And that's why biotech is always a slow burn because it
Wow.
just takes a long time.
How depressing. It's
Welcome to medicine.
yeah, you have the potential of this this highly effective solution. Like the studies or the amount of time needed to determine if it's successful is just so long, and like it probably doesn't have to be as long as you've just described there, 6 or so years. I'm sure if there was enough like incentive, the time to figure out if this is going to be a workable solution or not could be compressed quite significantly. But there's probably a number of factors which are extending the duration of the study, from the number of people that are even willing to participate in something like this, and then finding trials, and then a bunch of other things that are, yeah, at play here behind the scenes that we don't even understand, or I don't understand anyway.
Yeah, I will say like the early phase clinical research is actually pretty boring. This phase of the study is actually not designed to answer if it will work or if it will reverse aging. The early cohorts are intentionally small, so the fact that it only has 18 people is not an accident. The phase one is basically, okay, here, take this. Okay, pee in this cup. Okay, let me get your blood. Okay, let me check your eyes. And then did you die or did you have any sort of like adverse reaction, right? Like the early data is just it's just safety, right? It's just to make sure that you have no adverse events. Patients are followed for years. The FDA requires like 5 to 15 years of safety monitoring. You slowly escalate the dose. No one wants to be the regulator who greenlit the first epigenetic cancer therapy by accident, right? Yeah, the effect sizes are really small. It takes a long time to prove this. You just have to prove that because one of the key risks here is that when you do this epigenetic reset, that the cells may go all the way back. If you wipe the hard drive, so to speak, that cells may not know what they're doing, and then you get these weird growths in cancer cells and things like that. And we've seen that with other cell and gene therapies before where they actually cause cancers because of this issue. So that safety part of it has to be proven out first. And this is always the trickiest part of it. And that's why the phase one studies are like, you're not going to have an answer at the end of this study. Does this work? You won't have that. It's just, we're using it in humans. We're seeing if it's safe. Phase two will be more around efficacy.
Fair enough. It's something as invasive as this. So you're targeting the genes and manipulation of the genes. Like you do want all the precautions to be taken. But yeah, I'm curious now is how much and yeah, to what extent different trials are to what extent is there like prioritization and acceleration of different trials based on their potential positive impact on humanity? Like we saw with during the pandemic that we were able to accelerate kind of the development of vaccines and obviously because it was impacted so many people across the world that was prioritized. I don't know how much that happens on like a regular basis.
You have to remember that like vaccine studies are notorious for being fast burning, right? Different therapeutic areas have different paces at which those clinical trials tend to run. And so vaccine studies are you're working usually with healthy adults, right? So
Mm,
you're injecting them with the vaccine and then it's you're doing it at you're doing this like analysis at the thousands or tens of thousands of study participants level because you want to see at the population level what's going to happen if X number of them probabilistically will be exposed to the disease based on the epidemiology, and then which ones were exposed to the disease and which ones were able to have a better outcome when they contracted the disease when they had the vaccine versus not. And there's these control groups and so forth. But that generally happens quicker because it's like once you're vaccinated, usually the vaccine is effective within a week or a couple of weeks. And then you're either exposed to the disease, and we can very quickly track, okay, once you've contracted this infectious disease, how did you fare? And
mm,
it's very quickly, it's a much faster timeline for researchers to be able to understand the safety and efficacy of the vaccines. I
mm,
think for other therapeutic areas outside of infectious disease, right, for cardiometabolic, those are I would say medium moving studies. And then for oncology, that's much slower because
mm,
oncology, you're looking at 5 year mortality rates, you're looking at cancer growth, you're looking at other endpoints that take years to, or months or years to manifest. And so to measure, if you're measuring the diameter of someone's cancer tumor, you have to see months later how big or small is it. You have to, it just takes longer, right? These are just longer dated studies and you're not using healthy adults. So it takes longer to recruit patients because you need to recruit patients with this particular kind of cancer. And usually, when you start the study, there's already a certain standard of care for every type of cancer. So if you have, I don't know, like lung cancer, the first line is like there's immunotherapies, depending on what it is. And then the second line is maybe chemo. I'm just making this up. I don't know. But then, yes, then third or fourth line, which is we call relapsed or refractory, which is if it comes back or nothing else worked, or you have metastases, then, okay, then you can enroll patients for your new therapy, right? And so you've seen CAR T, which is chimeric antigen receptor cell treatments for cancers. They started as like fourth line, and in some cancers, they're trying to move their way up to the first line, but it takes time because you have to prove that it's better than the standard of care. And medicine, the medical establishment is very conservative, right? The Hippocratic Oath is always do no harm. So every doctor, every oncologist is going to say, this is what has historically worked. Doesn't work
yeah.
very well, but it works 30% of the time or 40% of the time. So we're going to stick with this rather than giving you some new experimental treatment that we don't know if it works. So paradoxically, clinical trials which actually do advance quicker are the ones for very rare or very devastating diseases where there is no other therapy. So for rare diseases, sometimes you can get a therapy to market faster because not only do you have a special designation by the FDA, but you also just aren't competing against any other standard of care. Whereas if you're in a very crowded space, cardiometabolic statins have been around for 60 plus years. So for anyone doing trials on the PSK9 inhibitors, it took time because you're competing like, is it better than a statin? And turns
Mm.
out they are better than statins and they tend to have fewer side effects. But it took a while for that to come through. So different types of therapies just take longer to do clinical research on.
Makes sense. It has me wondering, like, there's all this talk, and a lot of people are trying to use AI. We come back to AI for things for accelerating, for assisting in like speeding up this whole process. From a lot of what you've described, it sounds like there are just complications and factors which really I don't know how AI really supports or helps to speed up. It might help on the drug discovery side, which I guess is what people are probably focusing their attention to, like coming up with hypothetical with candidates that could be effective. But there are all these other things that you just described, which are obstacles, and it doesn't seem to be any way in which to speed up that process from what I just heard. Unless we could clone a lot of these humans that are at this stage in which they need treatment, massively increase the sample rate, and yeah, carry out experiments that way. Seems to me we need to focus on human cloning as the next. leap in technology in order to collect more data.
Yeah, I think this is such an interesting line of inquiry because we we've
Simulation.
heard of AI slop in the context of like short form video or like pictures. People say, "Oh, that's slop. Oh, this is slop." But the same principles apply when it comes to drug discovery. We have a lot of molecules on the shelf, right? Like there's this wave of AI enthusiasm for AI to be used for drug discovery. I think because I don't know. That's probably the easiest and most frictionless way of, oh, maybe you could run little models and these in silico models could generate like potential molecules that you could research and you can investigate. And it's okay, that's great. And then once you have the molecules, then what? Then
Yeah.
whose job? And then it's, oh, and then we're going to go back to our age-old way of doing clinical trials over many years and enrolling patients. And okay, so this is the part that we need to brute force, right? This is the part. So it's actually more challenging, right? We don't need more molecules. We have plenty of molecules. In fact, I've heard some researchers who are far smarter than me and are like experts in biochemistry say exactly that we probably already have all the drugs that we need and all the molecules that we need. The
Yeah.
real bottleneck for clinical development is not more drugs, more molecules. We got them all. They're on a shelf somewhere, waiting in a pile, waiting to be tested, waiting for the funding, waiting for the patients, right? You need the actual like
Yeah.
patients in the clinic.
Data.
Like you got to
Yes.
get this stuff in the clinic. You got to put people's little tags in the armband. You got to take the blood, take the like you got to do the clinical trials. That's the
Yeah.
part that takes forever. That's the part that's expensive. You're talking $40,000 per patient per year in the United States. That's the
Mm.
bottleneck, not the discovery, right? We've discovered everything. It's fine. There's only 20,000 human proteins. There's only
Yeah.
20. We know all of them, and many of them we've decided are undruggable targets anyway. And we have drugs for a lot of the other ones. So we already know the number of human proteins. Like you're not going to find I don't know, this whole like drug discovery thing is just it's just putting the absolute cart before the horse. We don't need more hypothesis. We need better hypothesis and we need better run experiments and we need faster clinical trials.
So you don't, and I'm way out of my depth here because I really don't have that much domain knowledge about this whole space. But some of the arguments that I hear for why I can support in generating candidates more around, I guess, the quality of candidates. For whatever reason, perhaps AI could help us shortlist candidates that are more likely than others to succeed in clinical trials. But yeah, so more you one shot the whole experiment phase rather than spend as you said, 40,000 per patient and 3, 4, 5, 6 years, and only then to discover actually this was never going to work. But I don't know if there's any kind of truth to that, or yeah, what we're seeing in that space.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I think if you, we're very bad at the moment at predicting ex ante which therapeutic hypothesis will succeed in humans. Only 10% of programs that enter the clinic actually work. You spend billions of dollars, you do years of research, clinical research, and only 1 out of 10 of these molecules, less than that, are going to make it to market. And so the existing AI systems are not trained on the kinds of causal, dynamic, multi scale biological data that would be required to replace or approximate in-human testing. They make use of the same data that we've been generating for decades and not very successful strategies of defying what's called Ayrum's law, which is the opposite of Moore's law. It's just Moore's law backwards, which is the fact that we as a society keep just spending more and more money on drugs and we keep getting fewer and fewer drugs approved for all the money. So we just keep chucking more money at the problem and we get fewer drugs approved every year. So yeah, if I think there are cases where AI applied to protein structure prediction, like with AlphaFold, and de novo design directly addresses a genuine bottleneck, but those cases are the exception rather than the rule, right? So there are like certain areas where we could use AI to address some of these problems and have a much better, much more informed view from the outset before drugs enter the clinic of how they'll behave and how these like models will be predictive of clinical research. But as of right now, we just don't have that data. The machines are not trained on that data. Biological systems are incredibly complex machines. It's really challenging.
Yeah. It ties into a little bit, yeah, it ties into some of the discussions that like Dario and Demis had at Davos. More so on the fact that like what are the obstacles or what are the new capabilities that are needed to take us from this current like version or iteration of AI that we have to AGI. And I think those two figures had very different perspectives on what might get us there. And Dario was more saying around if we tighten this feedback loop, as you were saying earlier, we're likely going to rapidly increase the capabilities of these models. They're going to self-learn and we're going to get to AGI. Whereas I think Demis pointed out that they seem to still be missing like some cognitive ability, one like the ability to pose like maybe interesting questions or create, yeah, be creative. And I guess I'm thinking about that because I don't know how these AI systems are being adapted in the domain that we're just talking about now with drug discovery, but most of deep learning anyway. And again, I don't know what other type of machine learning or AI is being done. But most of deep learning is around like learning patterns in the data, chucking in a bunch of data and hoping that these neural networks will find something that generalizes. And if that's how it's been done in like drug discovery, then we only have really like the current like set of medicine to really draw from and the success that they've had. And you can build a model which says, oh, I think this kind of new molecule is more likely to succeed because it looks like kind of some of these other molecules that we've already created and invented. But in order to really discover something new, it feels like we need to go beyond, as you said, the current data. Like I'm sure that would help us in some ways discover things that, like the vast like plethora of candidates that we already have. But perhaps in some instances, like we actually really need like, creative leaps. And I don't know how well like our AI systems that we have today can make creative leaps into new territory and help us out there.
Yeah. Do I have it right that I guess my like crude mental model for the way these frontier models have been set up is that they've been trained on what's been referred to, I think what Ilya refers to as the fossil fuel of frontier models or of modern LLMs, which is basically it's like Reddit, Stack Overflow, Quora. It's basically like the internet, all
Yeah,
these like message boards. Like that's what they've been trained on, right? These are not they sound smart because they sound like us, and they sound like us because they've been trained on message boards and like online available internet content. But is that right? But so it hasn't been, I don't know if it's been trained on the entire PubMed library. It's been trained on Stack Overflow, so it's good at automating SWEs. But is it, I don't know, I guess my point is like, you've already trained it on petabytes of data. We don't have another huge repository of petabytes of like medical or clinical data that we could feed it, do we? That we could suddenly have a step change where it's suddenly much smarter in in this particular domain of clinical trials and medicine. Is that right? Or
generally, I think that's right. That language, most of the language models that we have today, especially the mainstream ones, have been trained on the whole corpus of text that is available online. And perhaps I'm sure they've actually also made struck licensing agreements with specific publications and data for the data gatherers to use that particular data to further improve the modeling capabilities. On top of that, you also have like offshoots. You have people taking like open source models or other language models and refining them on specific or like specific domain data from specific domains like medical
mm,
text and stuff like that. That by doing so, they will improve their capabilities in that domain beyond the sort of more general abilities of these larger mainstream providers. So there are cases of that. I think like Google has MedPalm. MedPalm, I think, is from Google, which I think has I'm not that knowledgeable about all the benchmarks that they use to measure capability in like the medical domain, but I think that from what I briefly recall has shows like improvement beyond like the more broader models on like medical questions at the very least. Also, people are training language models on things that are not text and hoping that they will see similar capabilities in those specific domains. For example, in the context of what we're talking about with like biology and genes, a gene is essentially a sequence of the human gene. DNA is a sequence of genes, right? And you can take these large models, these new architectures like the transformer architecture, and you can essentially just pass it DNA and hope that it will learn something from a large amount of like DNA information. So as long as you can model anything as long as you can model anything as like a sequence and collect enough data to be able to feed into these models, it seems so far that we're able to get like really good results from these like transformer models. And you,
mm,
Patrick Collison from Stripe I think, has set up this research institute called ARC, in which they're trying now to essentially model the cell or build transformer AI models that can like model DNA. Uh,
mm.
so this is yeah, very similar but different in the sense that the data that is going in is not text; it's like genetic information. Whether that what we'll be able to do with that could be really interesting. I don't know some of the things that they're imagining that we might use that for, but if we can model DNA, then maybe we can predict better outcomes for like gene therapies and stuff like that.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
remember Dwarkesh saying on a podcast at one point that how far away are we from being able to have an AI agent or an agentic AI solution which can do my taxes for me?
Yeah.
And the US tax code is complex. I get that. But I think until we have AI agents that can at least do taxes, we're probably far away from having AI agents that can have medical breakthroughs and aid in like serious clinical development. Because the US tax code, complicated as it may be, is nowhere near the level of sophistication of biological systems in the human body.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. They might not be like connected in the sense that so far up until now, before we had these large language models, right? Like we've uh, been developing AI systems or algorithms to solve problems in very specific domains. Like we've had like medical algorithms for natural sciences, we've had algorithms for natural language processing, computer vision, etc. And in many cases, like these fields don't and progress in these fields doesn't like improve homogeneously. Like you get like improvement in one area and then yeah, that's not really related to an improvement in another area. So progress has been like very confined to like a specific vertical.
Mm.
I guess AGI is like more of, can we build a single model which then shows like incredible ability across all of these domains? And I don't know if these language models get us to that point, but anyway, I think that, just to, yeah, in response to you, I don't know if just because we can't build a model that does your taxes very well, we can't like focus energies on building an AI system which is capable of solving some types of problems like in the, yeah, in the sphere of like biology and medicine. And I totally agree with you that it's super complex. So maybe we can't anyway. Like there's just so much we don't know about our body and the way it operates. But yeah, I don't know if they have to be related.
That's fascinating. Yeah. I guess it's like the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed yet, right?
Yeah,
So maybe in
maybe.
some domains we'll just light speed ahead and some will just lag. And it won't be, it'll be domain by domain specific.
I think we'll still see something like that, and it will be driven a lot by funding as well. Yeah, but yeah, it remains to be seen if these single models, which you can just feed in like a bunch of sequenced information and be able to get like real generalizable abilities from there. As so far, weirdly enough, like the transformer, which just takes in like a sequence of bits of information called tokens, has been able to like produce incredible results.
It's always funny to me that so much of AI is still this black box where we don't
Yeah,
actually know what's happened. We don't know why it works. And this actually poses another question with regards to creating AI tools that can aid in clinical development. It's if it's not deterministically reproducible, right?
yeah,
Everything is a black box and we don't know why the AI is giving the instruction set that it gives or why AI is giving the output that it gives, can we really use it in highly regulated settings? If you tell the FDA that, oh, we set up the trial because the AI told us to do this, or we set up these endpoint parameters because the AI told us,
yeah.
that's not good enough. Like you have to have reasons, right? Like the AI needs to be able to explain its thinking, and to the extent that it's murky or not traceable or not reproducible, like bars it from being used in certain contexts.
Interpretability is a big issue, but it's so funny now that we have these language models which can simulate, well, which simulate language, and they can give us an explanation. If you see a lot of these reasoning models, and sometimes from these providers, they'll hide it, but you can see thinking. There's a drop down which shows like
You see the chain of I'm thinking about this, now I'm running the counter argument, and yeah, yeah, yeah.
all of that is like a string of information that this thing is outputting. Is that actually being used by the model to arrive at some sort of conclusion? Who knows? But it's very interesting that you can ask it for an explanation and it will generate an explanation for whatever it's outputted. Yeah, which is
Yeah, we don't know if that's a red herring or if that's really how it thought. We don't know. No one knows. Even Demis Hassabis himself doesn't know.
no one knows. It sort of boils down to the personification of these systems. Is it actually thinking? What is thinking? But all it's doing is spitting out like characters after character.
Yeah, it's
And
just next token prediction, right? This gets back at like when what was it when Watson won Jeopardy, and then the headline the next day was like Watson doesn't know that it won.
Yeah,
It's the
exactly.
same thing here, right? Okay, it's going to give you an incredible clinical trial protocol design. It does
Yeah.
not know it has done this. It doesn't know that it's given you a protocol design for a clinical trial, right? It doesn't know that it's given you, I don't know, whatever it might be.
And it might generate a plausible explanation for that, but you don't know if you should take that explanation at face value. All you know is that they're associated with each other in some way. So it's yeah, it's weird. It's weird, right? It's weird. Who knows that like humans are? I guess maybe you could treat humans like a black box. Our brain is a bit of a black box. We don't
Yeah, it's
really.
the same thing. Like we don't know if there's this agent in the human brain, like pushing the levers and gears, and this gets into this almost philosophical debate of do we have free will and
Exactly. On the topic of personal assistants and agents, actually, like there is something that's blowing up recently on Twitter, and it's called ClawBot, and it's spelled not CLAUD like Claude, which is the name given to like Anthropic's models. It's spelled like Claude and lobster claw, like CLAWD, and it's an open source like AI personal assistant that
Claude
basically,
bot.
yeah, ClawBot, and I think it's starting to blow up, and it hooks into it runs you can run it locally. You can preserve the privacy of your data, which is a positive thing. But then it also hooks into a bunch of other you can interface with a bunch of other tools or pieces of equipment. For example, you can get it to control like IoT devices that you might have in the house, like smart lights or cameras in your house if you want to. You can get it to hook up to your browser. You can chat to it, send it audio messages, send it images, it will respond to you. It has
But
memory.
so what does it run on? Is there a foundational model underneath Claude or
I think you can change it. You can use any model.
so you can bring your own model?
I think you can. I think it's
And
more
it
like
hooks up to Spotify, hooks up to Twitter. It will send emails. It can send WhatsApp messages.
yeah, you can basically enable all of these different features or skills for us, and then people are like building new skills all the time in which you can download and use. But I think people for a long time have been wanting personal assistants, and this is just like an open source version of that. But I think a lot of the other companies are also thinking about like personal assistants as well, from Google, OpenAI, and other companies like that.
That's
But
pretty cool.
interesting, yeah. To be honest, I came across the creator of this a couple of months back last year. He's based in London, and there was like a meetup here, and he came up and he was like presenting this whole Claude bot, and it was like this like buff Austrian dude with like this Austrian accent. I think he sold his company, and then he says his in his bio is like, I came out of retirement to play with AI, and he made this, and he like this guy who was like. Yeah, he seemed quite eccentric. Would not shut up during the presentation. Would keep going on and belaboring like how good this thing was, and like just waved him away. I was like, oh, what is this? This is okay. In when I compared it to like the other demos, like during the meetups I attended, I was like, okay, this is interesting, personal assistance, whatever, but it doesn't seem to be that significant. But then like I log on to the to Twitter sphere like earlier this week, and all of a sudden it's got blown up. I'm like, huh, maybe my ability to appraise what will go viral or not is really is skewed. So anyway, it's
But isn't this just like Zapier? It's I guess it's like you set up something triggers something to do something, right? So it's like food ordering or Twitter or emails. Okay, if I get an email from this person, then send an email to this person. If I play this song on Spotify, then order me this dish on Foodora or whatever it is.
I mean, all of these agents are essentially that. The agent is like the spine, and the ability it makes the decisions on what it should do, but the capability of the agent is extended by attaching all of these different potential like interfaces from
Hmm.
the ability to hook up to your notes somewhere, your Apple Notes, or the ability
Hmm.
to make a telephone call to order you some food. The incredible innovation that has happened over the last year is that we built these AI systems that are able to some extent make decisions about which tools and which actions to take and in what order to take them. And they seem to be doing that somewhat effectively. So yeah, without this progress, you would have had to just create like a really you would have to create like an extensive rule set, right?
Yeah, like this patchwork of systems, and you'd have to like specifically codify each rule.
Yeah, it's crazy. You would ask something like send an email back to David, tell him this, that, and the other. And you'd have to write that somewhere, figure out what the user is asking, first of all, and then extract all of the entities from that message, and then figure out like which email server to connect to, and then write the email. The agent just has these tools connected to it, and it's able to like do that on its own, which is, yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I think especially for a lot of people in the United States where we are just inundated with decision fatigue, paperwork, insurance, medical billing is the worst offender when it comes to this, right? So if you could just have an agent who does all this legwork, oh, I called the clinic, they gave me this whatever billing code, I called the insurance company, the pre-authorization didn't work, I have to do this. You have hours and hours of just dealing with all this like tedious bullshit. And they do it on purpose. They purposely make it a pain in the ass so that they don't have to pay you whatever it is that you're trying to claim. But if you just had an agent running in the background and just
Yeah.
gave you like little updates, oh, 10 a.m., like, oh, hey, I called the provider and they gave you this code. I'll be calling the insurance company this afternoon. Okay, cool. Thanks. Sounds good. Boop. And then it's like, I don't have to deal with it. And it removes friction from my life. Hey, book me a table for sometime tonight. The places I like, you know what my wife likes. Let's just book us a table after she finishes her yoga class or whatever it is. Just deal with it. I don't have time. I don't have any time. I don't want to think about it. It's annoying. I don't want to deal with it. Dinner reservations, dealing with my family's flight, when do they get there, order them a car, do my all the medical billing, pay my bills. I don't have time with it. Like when I get my paycheck, deploy a certain amount of that into the S&P 500, dollar cost average into the S&P 500. Just deal with it. I don't want to do it. I'm
I
busy.
don't know that. I don't know how that is in the future. That what stops us getting making that future a reality from now? That seems to be the future that we're heading towards, and I can't see anything getting in the way of that. There is so much leverage that an individual can now obtain from having these agents like run in the background and do all of these different tasks for them. And yeah, I totally see that happening very soon. Yeah. I was thinking just before this, I can even deploy agents on the internet and be like, you know what, you can monitor this thing for me or find me interesting examples of this, that, or the other. Maybe I'm scouting for a new vacuum cleaner. I'm like, all right, just keep working in the background and find something for me. Like, you could have built a system like that probably previously, and I'm sure there are like even products that are built around this whole idea of, in this particular example, like commerce, just scouting for new pricing prices of products. But you don't really even need like bespoke products to do that anymore. Like you can just have this more general intelligent agent where you can give it like this set of instructions, and yeah, and some, like I said, some a small subset of tools, like be able to read a website, be able to search a particular website, be able to write somewhere, and it can just do that for you in the background. Like,
Yeah, yeah. The real unlock will be when I have my Tesla robot at home and then it sends me notifications when it did the laundry. It's, hey, I folded your laundry. I reorganized the drawers. I did this. Cool. Sounds good. Feed the cat.
yeah,
I just, and it's hooked up. I just, as soon as it gets an email, it knows that it has to do this. As soon as the weather alert happens, it knows the snowstorm is coming. So it knows that it needs to prepare in some way. Makes me coffee in the morning. Like everything just becomes this like ambient. There's this virtual assistant always working for you, working in tandem with a physical assistant that lives in your house. And
what do
it's
you do?
always just
What will we do?
that is such an unlock if you can have that. Like how many more hours I get during the week if that works.
Yeah. You'd obviously have a clone as well that you would just do your normal 9 to 5 job as well at some point in the future. You'd be sending Steve Bot to do your meetings for you. And
Oh,
uh,
dude, like there, yeah, what is the subreddit? It's called like R overemployed, where people have 8 jobs that are all remote, and then they have 8 monitors, they have like, a control panel, and they've set up a series of bots to like email their different colleagues. Oh yeah, I'm working on it right now. Oh yeah, I'm doing it, and like jiggle their mouse on Teams.
that is, we're soon arriving at that future. I think at this moment in time, these systems are not capable enough for really long running tasks. I think to be able to just set it off and it would just go and function like incredibly effectively for 8, 10, 12 hours, 14 hours, whatever. We're not there yet, but I think the ability of these models to continue executing at, yeah, at a really high level over a long period of time is soon getting there. Anyway, by the way, I need to, like, in 10 minutes need to get off.
That's
uh
all right. That's all right. I think my wife is sending me a signal that I need to
Oh,
also,
all right. There you go.